Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm just going to give, just wait a few minutes to see if anybody else will be joining. So thank you for your patience. Hope everybody's doing well despite the pandemic. I guess working for a health NGO, I'm particularly sensitive to what's going on around the world. So just hope that everybody is surviving and thriving, staying safe. Remember to wear masks. It makes a difference. So I'll just wait maybe a couple more minutes. Okay, so maybe let's get this started for all of you lovely people who arrived on time. So welcome to this webinar where I'll be discussing how to drive social impact with data. My name is William Guicheney. I'm the analytics manager at Operation Fistula. And if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I ramble on there about data and social impact things all the time. So if you're interested in these topics, please go ahead and follow me. So I'll start by saying that it's really nice to meet you all or meet you all. I thoroughly appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to just come and listen in on this webinar. At the end of the day, Operation Fistula is a tiny NGO. We work on a pretty obscure cause, and we're quite unique in how we use data tools to do that. So it's really, really nice to get a chance to be able to, just share how it is we do that, what it is we work on, and really, get the social impact community kind of together, and to discuss how we do that with data. So seriously, really appreciate people tuning in and taking the time to, just hear me blabber and hopefully leave some of this with insights on how you might be able to do this in your organization or in your own day-to-day life. So claps all around for everyone for being here. Okay, let's do this. So what's our agenda for today? So I'm going to start by giving you some context. So generally explaining to everyone what obstetric fistula is. I'm then going to go about explaining, how it is that we go and try and work with helping women with obstetric fistula and eradicating this condition. I think it's important in order to understand how data really empowers our activities to understand the complexity of working with women who have obstetric fistula, and also the environments in which we're working in, which tend to be, very low resource, high constraints, and are kind of unique environments to operate in, and are generally quite different than what most business intelligence analysts are used to. After giving you some information on that, I'll explain how we use data and analytics to help us run our operations. And finally, if we have some time, I'll open up on more generally how is data playing a role in the social impact sector more generally. So what is obstetric fistula? We often say that it's the worst thing you've never heard of. And the reason for this is that most people have generally never heard of obstetric fistula. To be honest, before I'd applied even for this job, I had never heard of it myself. But it is a absolutely horrendous condition that affects a whole load of women, mainly in poorer countries. And generally, obstetric fistula happens in countries or in systems where public health systems have failed women. And you can see from this picture that it's a condition that affects, well, sadly, very young women, most generally. So what is obstetric fistula? So obstetric means that it's related to childbirth, and fistula means that it is an unnatural connection. So without being too graphic, explaining to you how an obstetric fistula happens. So picture a young girl who lives in a very remote village in a pretty poor country, perhaps in sub-Saharan Africa. She becomes pregnant, maybe she's 13 or 14 years old, and she goes into labor. She goes into labor, maybe, just behind her house by herself, and she is just physically too small to deliver her baby, which means that she ends up being in labor for days. And so by being in labor for such a long time, the head of the baby puts a lot of pressure on essentially either the birth canal and the urethra, or the birth canal and so the colon. And all this pressure essentially stops the blood from flowing in the skin, and the skin rots away, and a fistula or a hole or a natural connection appears between the birth canal and those two orifices. And the woman essentially ends up leaking. So she loses her ability to be continent, and she ends up leaking either urine or feces pretty much constantly. And when this happens, a whole lot of very negative things happen. She's generally ostracized from her community, from her village, from her family, both because, well, she is leaking, she probably smells quite bad, but also because childbirth is, let's say, a culturally very important act, or in most cultures. And people might think, people might not even understand that obstetric fistula is actually a medical condition, but might think that this woman, is cursed or just generally unfit to be part of this society, and she will often be marginalized. And so it's estimated that there's roughly 1 million women spread across 55 countries who have obstetric fistula. But it's very hard to get relevant, or good data around this, because, well, it happens in countries that generally have poor healthcare records or healthcare data. And, as I've explained, it happens generally when it happens, women tend to hide or disappear. And so it's a very invisible disease. But there is hope. There is hope in the way that a surgery was discovered, I believe in 1880, with a 90% success rate. And so very simply, the surgeon will simply sew up the fistula, or there's different techniques based on the type of fistula or how complex it is. And by just sewing it up, they can just stop the leaking, and the woman can have a normal life again. And so it's it's not a very long procedure. It's not the simplest of procedures, but a trained surgeon can do it pretty easily. And a 90% success rate is pretty high. And so with that in mind, the sort of key development tool that Operation Fistula uses is what we call unconditional cash transfers. So the person you're looking at right now is Dr. Fidel. He's a surgeon in Madagascar, a country where we have a strong presence, who we've been working with for years. And essentially what we do is every time that Dr. Fidel performs one of these surgeries, we provide him with a cash payment. And so by doing this, we incentivize surgeons to, well, train themselves and learn about this condition and to just do them. But we also provide funding to the hospitals. So we're injecting cash in these kind of resource-constrained healthcare systems. And also what you'll see on the right is after each surgery, Dr. Fidel will fill in data about that patient in the surgery in a tablet. And we're just, in a way, providing all the healthcare professionals with really good data about their patients, which just strengthens the healthcare system overall. So that's kind of what we hope to do. We hope to fund as many surgeries and to sort of drive the healthcare system in these places to focus on fistula more than they do today. Okay. So with that in mind, how does this actually all work in practice? So I've chosen to focus on one of our flagship programs, which is called Free Madagascar. So freedom from fistula, for every woman everywhere. And the objective of this program is to clear 50 communes of obstetric fistula. So the way that obstetric fistula is often treated is a group of surgeons will go to, a village, let's say. They'll do what we call a camp for a few days, where they'll tell everybody around, we're doing these surgeries for a few days. So if you have obstetric fistula, come and we'll do the surgeries for free. But the problem with this is that there's no way of really knowing how much you're actually tackling the problem. Maybe, you're doing 100 surgeries, but if there's 10,000 women there with fistula, it's really just a Band-Aid or a drop in the bucket. So what we've tried to figure out is how can we legitimately say that an entire geographical space has been cleared of fistula. And so what you're seeing are pictures of, well, some of them are patients, some of them are villages where we've been to work, some is our team, and one is a, well, crazy Zoom call with loads of people everywhere that I'm sure you've all been part of as we all are working from home during the pandemic. And so it's a very large operation. 50 communes is, hundreds of thousands of people. We now have a team of roughly 70 people in Madagascar, a mix of administrative staff, doctors, nurses, technical staff will go out in the field. It's a very massive program ongoing right now. And it's a perfect way of showing how we use data to drive social impact. So the free program is kind of split into two main components. One, which is the outreach, so which is us going out in the field, telling people what we're doing and trying to find patients. And then what we call the patient journey, which is once we found a patient, how do we get her treated? And then also help her reintegrate into society. So outreach is all about finding the patients. And as you can see from these pictures, finding patients, traveling around, doing this kind of work in Madagascar is extremely complicated. So I've gone through our Slack, we're big Slack users, and found some of the pictures sent by our Madagascar staff of how they are actually going out to these different communes and reaching the patients. And this is extremely difficult. Madagascar is a beautiful but geographically extremely complicated country to travel in. Roads might be really bad. There's loads of tropical rain, which might fully just flood roads and make it impossible for us to go there. And the bottom right picture is actually cases where an entire commune or village might not be accessible by road. And so we have to load up all our teams and motorbikes on barges and bring them over to the island so that we might have a chance of meeting people there and finding patients. And so I'll take this chance to start showing you some of our data in action. And so to give you an idea of the scale of our operations and really, how we collect data. So the outreach program is split into different parts. We'll do what we call a commune meeting, where we go to a commune and we meet all the different commune leaders. We tell them about what we're doing. And throughout these meetings, we collect data. So it's quite cool in the end. Thanks to awesome mapping, we can collect data, know where we've been, what did we talk about, who was there, and start getting an idea of how big is our reach, so that we can track our work in the field and make sure that we are that we are covering the entire geographical space. So we'll do community meetings. After that, we'll do smaller sensitization meetings where we go in a smaller group with local, what we call Fokatanis leaders. So Fokatanis are sort of sub-communes, so smaller villages. We'll speak with them, tell them about fistula, ask them if they have any patients. From there, we'll meet maybe local leaders. So it might be traditional birth attendants. It might be the local health worker from the local health outpost or religious leaders. And we'll do group discussions with them to try and educate them about fistula, to let them know that it's a medical condition, and tell them that we have a whole program to help women who have fistula. And we'll also do home visits. So you can see we've done roughly 2,000. Unfortunately, COVID had to force us to sort of slow down some of these activities, but at the end, it's very, very cool to be able to just see all the different unique houses where we went to try and find patients. So after the outreach is done, we then get to really the meat of the program, which is what we call the patient journey. So think about this almost like if there was a hospital, but except it's in a massive scale all over a country, working in the condition that I just showed you with very, very bad roads. And as you can imagine, very bad internet connectivity, and with a whole chain of different actors. So what happens when we found a woman? So here we're at the top left, it will first register her. We'll register her, we'll get all her details, her name, everything we need to identify her later in the process. We'll then perform what we call a water test. So a water test is literally you make a woman drink water and then you see what happens. And if she leaks a lot, then she probably has a fistula. And after this, we've confirmed that, okay, we found a fistula patient, and then we then have to transport her from wherever she lives to what we call a hope center. So our hope centers are homes that are completely run by Operation Fistula and that are placed around the key hospitals where we work. And they're sort of the staging centers where the women will stay while they go through the medical process. And it's also, we call them hope centers because it's also a place where we do a lot of the social work. It might be the first time that some of these women meet other fistula patients. We work with social workers who will help them, speak about the issues they've been facing and kind of get them ready to, one, for the medical procedure, but also to be reintegrated into society afterwards. So they'll stay at the Hope Center, and then they start being absorbed by the local medical system. So the different surgeons that we work with, and then also the different nurses who are our direct staff. So the process there is we'll first get their medical history, so trying to understand what caused the fistula, but also see if maybe they have any other conditions that might affect how we do the surgery or things that the surgeon might need to know. We'll do a physical exam, confirm that a fistula is there, also look at what type of fistula is it. Is it a rectovaginal fistula, a vesicovaginal fistula, everything that you would need to know to be able to prepare the surgery. The surgeon will then perform the surgery itself and afterwards complete like a post-op form where he explains, what happened during the process and also how is she recovering? Is she bleeding in any way? Did she get an infection? Just like if you went to a normal hospital. After that, she'll recover at the hospital and at the Hope Center, and she'll finally be discharged so that she might return to her home. And then we have a number of different follow-up steps to make sure that she is reintegrating into her village correctly, and also to, just be rigorous and actually measure what is this, the impact of this whole program on this woman's life. Because at the end, impact goes way beyond just doing a surgery. It's also how does a program help this woman, just live a healthier life in the future. So the follow-up bit is extremely important as well. So that's kind of how FREE works. We do this outreach, we find patients, and then these patients go through this multi-step patient journey where they're first registered, they receive a surgery, they receive all sorts of social support, and then they are sent back to their communities to go back to their lives. So, sorry, sip of water. How do data and analytics help us make this work? So I've decided to split this into 3 key buckets, which are essentially efficiency, effectiveness, and engagement. So before I jump into each of these 3, I think it's about time I tell you about how this whole infrastructure works and what I told you about the program actually looks like in the back end of our data systems. So throughout all the different steps that I showed you, so whether it's the outreach or whether it's a patient journey, and there's a reason I showed you specifically all these different steps, so all 8 of them, each of the different fistula staff involved in that process will collect data about the patient at that point in time. And they do this using something called ComCare. So ComCare is just an Android app. It's quite standard in the NGO health space because it allows you to do case management in the sense that you can register a patient and then you can fill out a number of forms about her through the process, much like if you're in a hospital and you're first booked into the hospital and then they'll collect information about you throughout the process there. So all our staff have Android tablets with ComCare installed on it, and the forms essentially match either the different outreach steps I showed you or the patient journey steps I showed you. And whenever they're connected to the internet, it will automatically push all that ComCare data to the ComCare cloud. We then use Alteryx to download this data, restructure it to make it analyzable and ingestible in tools like Tableau. And we drop all of this into Exasol. So we have dozens of different Exasol tables with data about each form, each patient. And also we have different apps. So for example, GoFAR free, what I've just showed you, the free program is its own app, but we've done different apps through the years. So all of these apps have their different tables in Exasol. And after, so this sort of clean backend data is there, we have all sorts of different downstream tools that we use to then analyze this data and take action from it that we then feed back to all our staff, whether it be senior staffs or our team in London or the senior staff in Madagascar, or just really field staff so that they can see how they're doing or where there's patients or also whatever information it is that they need. So this is sort of the core infrastructure or data infrastructure that build all the pipelines we need to do this data analysis. I'll say that most of this was built, so this deep infrastructure was built by Nalidi, who was the analytics manager before me, and she did an absolutely brilliant job. And I am so happy that she set all these things up so that I can focus on more of these downstream analytical tools and really building things that answer questions today. So I'll be going back to this slide from time to time to sort of explain to you how the data is brought into the different dashboards or tools that we use to answer specific questions. So, okay, the first batch of let's say, or the first topic that we work on is efficiency, which I like to think as making the machine run smoothly. So as you've seen, we're working over a huge country, over a huge sample of population. We've got around 70 staff of different, even just level of data literacy. Often in the field, people won't have internet for multiple weeks. The team in London will do a lot of this analysis, have to relate it back to Madagascar. A lot of things can fail in this process. It's quite complicated. There's a lot of data streaming in left and right. So it's very important to make sure that this runs efficiently. So the kinds of questions that we answer when we're looking at efficiency will be things like, is everyone using the correct version of CommCare? So much like any app on your phone, sometimes the developers will make updates. In the case of CommCare, it might be that we've just changed a few questions in some of the forms because we realized that the way they were asked weren't right, or maybe we've added a few forms because we realized that the old forms weren't working well. And it's very important for our data pipelines to be clean and for everything to run smoothly, that everybody uses the same app, or else someone might fill in a question that used to exist in the old app but doesn't exist anymore. Then Alteryx will throw in all sorts of errors, and then I spend my whole day fixing Alteryx rather than doing analysis and doing things that have direct benefit to the team. So to show you the kind of tools we use to do this, so going back to this slide first. So whenever someone fills out a form in CommCare, there's, let's say, direct data that they input. So it might be the patient's name, where she is, or the surgeon might put, I did a surgery at this date, this was the outcome. But it also collects all sorts of metadata. So metadata is just data, sort of contextual information about the data. So things like, what device was it filled on? What date was this form filled out on? Who filled out the form? And it'll also tell us what is the version of CommCare that was used. So when this data comes out, I'll push some of the data to Exasol. So I'll have a metadata table, and I'll drop this data into an automated Tableau dashboard, which looks like this. So I'll just tell you all the dashboards I'm showing you. I've had to remove all personally identifiable data, obviously. So they might look a little bit funky, but they're good enough for you to understand the gist of how they work. But so here you're looking at the free data quality tracker. And essentially it's an extremely simple dashboard that will tell you what version of CommCare is each of our user on. So it'll tell you, who they are. So are they a surgeon? Are they a member of the technical staff? How long have they been part of our organization for? A little bit of contextual information, but mainly they'll have these ticks. So if you have a green tick, that means great. That means that you've updated your version of CommCare. But if you have a red tick, that means that you filled out a form, but on a previous version. And the reason we have this dashboard is that I used to have a much more complicated dashboard, and our senior team in Madagascar told me, I can't read this. I don't know exactly what action to take. Whereas now they can regularly go on this dashboard and they can just see, this guy, he's got a red tick. I should probably call him and tell him, hey, can you just please update your version of CommCare? And all of this very automated. The only step that has to be taken is someone just needs to look at it and call the person and tell them, hey, you need to update your version of CommCare. So that's reducing one important point of failure. Another one, an extremely key one is making sure that all our doctors are getting paid on time and that they're getting paid accurately. So as I said, one of the key tools we use is this unconditional cash transfer program where we send money to the different surgeons that we have. And out of even just sheer respect for them, it's only fair that we would pay them, on time and that we would pay them a fair amount. But it's quite, in a way, complicated to be able to track exactly when the surgeries happen, where the surgeries are, who did them, who's doing the payments. The payments are done by your team Madagascar, so then they would need to relay this information by us. It's just a very businessy process. So a way that we've chosen to automate this, going back to this slide, whenever a surgeon completes a surgery form, it'll go to uploaded to ComCare. And then in Alteryx, I'll push this data to Exasol, and I'll have a table which is purely and very simply, this patient was operated on at this date by this guy, done. And when this workflow runs, it does two things. It publishes one table to Exasol, which is connected to Tableau, but it also uses the Airtable API. So for people who don't know Airtable, I'll show it to you in a second, but it's a sort of database meets Excel. You can work in it like Excel, but it's actually a full SQL database. So Alteryx, I'll use Alteryx to make an API. So post call to publish to Airtable all the different surgeries that have happened. And it looks something like this. So you'll have the case, you'll have all the surgeries, who the different people are. And more importantly, you'll have this. It'll tell you when a surgery happened, when a discharge date happened, but this payment date column will be empty. So the reason it's empty is that when our accountant in Madagascar will do the payment, she will fill this data point in. And she will just put that in. So that's the only piece of manual information that we can get straight from the data. So whenever she makes the payment, she puts the data in. And the next time that I run this workflow, the Airtable will make another API call and it will update the Exasol table to say there was now a payment that was made. So that we kind of have an automatic feedback loop table. The new records get pushed, the payment gets made, the payment date gets added, and then it gets fed back into the table, into the Exasol table. And this then lives in this very simple yet very effective, and also with completely fake data, surgery tracker, which will allow us to at a glance know what are all the surgeries we've done, did we make all the payments we need to do, how much money do we need to set aside this month to do these payments. But once again, a very simple automated tool where the only piece of human sort of work that needs to get done is putting in that payment date when it gets done. And we have a dedicated Slack channel for this where essentially me and the Malagasy accountant will do a bit of back and forth, and I'll tell her, hey, there's new records here. She'll tell me, oh, I think there's a duplicate record. And so it's just very efficient. Like the data is really at our fingertips and it's easy to take action based on it. And mainly it allows us to make sure that all our doctors are getting paid on time and we don't have to worry about that. And so finally, the last point I'll show in efficiency is making sure that people use the tech correctly. So as I said, we're working with a very large staff. A lot of them are not very tech savvy. They've never really worked with smartphones before. ComCare has loads of forms. It's a relatively complicated tool, which means that we need to make sure that people are respecting the rules around how they're meant to input data, but also that they input the data correctly. And so to do this, we have another very simple dashboard, which we like to call internally, what happened last week. And so essentially every time that there are, this is from our main sort of ComCare data. This dashboard is filtered to show all the data from the previous week. And it will essentially tell you what new forms did people submit, but also in this table. So here, this will look at the, let's say, metadata. So the actual date when the form was submitted, but in the form, people will say when the event happened. So for example, this form, the person said this event happened on the 14th of May, but they only submitted the form last week. So it gets a red tag because it means that the person submitted the data quite late, and that's something we don't want to happen. We want the data to be published on a timely basis. So it's easy for us to then call up this person and be like, hey, be careful, make sure you're filling your forms on time. But also, this dashboard is connected to our Slack through Zapier. So Zapier allows you to like automate simple, let's say, tasks on computers, which means that Monday at 9, when we all come into the office, we get this little picture snapshot in Slack, and we can all immediately start a thread and be like, oh, hey, like a surgeon's just posted loads of forms, let's follow up with him. Or loads of patients arrived at this Hope Center, let's make sure they have everything they need there. Once again, it's automating a very simple task to allow us to take actions very quickly rather than sift through the data in a complicated way. So that's it for efficiency, or at least these are some of the tools we use to make sure that that the Fistula machine and the free program run very smoothly. So secondly, we're going to look at effectiveness. Effectiveness is what I like to think of as making the machine do what it's supposed to do. So whereas efficiency is just about making all the pipelines really clean, about making sure that all of the field staff is using our tools correctly, and that the machine is well oiled. This is just about making sure we're going in the right direction, that we're going at the proper pace, and that we're achieving our objectives, which are at the end of the day, treating as many women as possible and treating them well. So the first point I have here is, are all registered patients receiving their appropriate treatment? So as I said, the patient journey is quite complicated. There's loads of steps. Through this step, the patient will go from her house to interacting with some of our field staff, to then going to a Hope Center, to then going, meeting with a surgeon, nurses. She then goes back home. There's loads of logistics. It's just very complicated. And we need to make sure that we can track each woman throughout this process. And in order to do that, we need to engage with the data in a very granular way. And granular means pretty time consuming. We only ever deal with maybe hundreds of records, but we might have hundreds of columns for each of them. And so we need to find an automated way to make sure that we can focus on looking at the data and not constantly doing data pools for specific patients or specific Hope Centers. And so the way we do this, going back to this little schema again, is working mainly in Airtable. And why Airtable? Because Airtable allows you to look at data in a table form really, really well. And because it's a database, it means that at the end, all the manual work we do in there, we can then use as a database to feed into other dashboards or to do other analysis in. So it's kind of like a super Excel in a way. And so, for example, for tracking all these patients individually, we have a dedicated Airtable. So here I've removed all the personal data again. So obviously none of our patients are named digits, but essentially these are all the patients that we have. And you can see in this table that there's loads of information about who this patient is and where she is. So much like a hospital will keep like a roster all the time of everything that's going on every day, we do the same with each patient to make sure that each patient gets the 100% best treatment possible. So these different steps, some of them are automatically put in there using the API. Here, there's different tables that I won't all show you, but they're all linked to one another. So that in the end, we can just look at this one table and we can immediately know where patients are. And then we can immediately contact field staff or surgeon to take whatever action a patient would need. It's very complicated working with obstetric fistula patients. A lot of them have never seen a doctor and never been to a hospital. Some refuse to come. Some think that they'll come and that the treatment that they'll get is receiving a pill. So when you tell them it's a surgery, they're likely to want to run away. So it's very complicated it requires a lot of finesse and a lot of just direct human sort of input to make sure that all of this runs smoothly. And at the end of the day, we help these women in the most humane and complete way. And having such a granular and reliable source of information allows us to do this quite well. Doing this also allows us to check things like this. It happens sometimes that, we've done work in Madagascar a few years ago. We registered a patient one time. She then reappears in the future and we're using a different app, or someone might not realize it's the same person. And we end up with like duplicate records. So by looking at the data in this very granular way, it allows us to identify these duplicates much more easily. get a better idea of, how many patients are actually there, and also kind of build a more thorough sort of medical history for each of the patients, so that we can, treat them in the best way and understand them better. So Airtable is a key tool in allowing us to engage with the data in a granular way. And the cool thing is that most of the data in here just every morning gets updated automatically through the API call made in our Alteryx workflow. So the final point is, are we finding all the patients? So the second point is, are patients receiving the best treatment possible? So there's loads of different dimensions to this, but the one I'll decide to focus on here is making sure that our surgeons who are working with are, skilled and are working with patients who are at their level of proficiency, let's say, so that, the surgeries are as successful as possible. And a way we do this, and a way that we sort of empower our surgeons to look at the data themselves, track their own performance, is through little simple dashboards like this one. So obviously this data is once again fake. One, I've never done a fistula surgery. I wish that I one day was good enough to do this, but I don't think I ever will. None of the patients are called index. And also I wish we had done 85,000 surgeries. But the idea behind this dashboard is that it's actually something that our surgeons use on the ground. They can just open it up in their phones, and they can directly see how their performance is going. And also we'll look at this to then, see maybe a surgeon is doing surgeries that are too complicated for him. We need to provide him with training or funding for training. We have loads of partner organizations who help us do that. But the cool thing is that this is a fully automated tool. Nobody really has to handle this. It uses user filters in Tableau to automatically show each surgeon only his data. And it's just one of the tools in our sleeves that allow us to really put the data at the fingertips of the people who need it the most to make the best decisions. And finally, are we finding all the patients in the communes? So this is, as I said, the whole point of free was, rather than doing a little camp, or not to talk bad about camps, but rather than doing just a camp, trying to clear an entire physical space. And in order to do this, there's obviously a very big geographic dimension to this work. So we have a very skilled, let's say, geospatial analyst in Madagascar, whose job is to map out the entire communities where we go, to make sure that we are actually going to every household or every village, and that we are actually clearing the entire physical space. So to give you a little snapshot of what if some of this work looks like, he uses QGIS to produce these maps, and he'll produce, let's say, an entire area around the key villages or hamlets where we're meant to be working. And then he will go using geospatial maps, do loads of analysis, even find a number of buildings in all the different villages where we're meant to go, so that then we can plan out our work much better. We can select communes that work for us, and we can also make sure that we understand a commune before we go there, so we can organize our whole team, their operations, their logistics, to make this work as smoothly as possible. And it's quite cool, thanks to the power of Mapbox, is that if I then, oh, come on, internet. Oh, damn it. It doesn't want to show itself. But I will not waste too much time on this. But if you zoom in on each of these points, you would see all the little hamlets and villages mapped out. And you can see that we have just dozens of them. And this is quite key in our ability to make the most of the resources we have and make sure that we're really focusing our efforts on specific geographical areas, but also targeting the entire area, so we can say, that an entire commune is free at the end of the day. Okay, that's it for effectiveness. And finally, I'll talk about engagement, which I've put down letting everybody know about our machine, which is one aspect of it. But I'd also say it's making the most out of the tech tools and supporting the sector as a whole. And I think that's one of the coolest things about tech, is that it's very easy to provide another partner with the same technology that you have, because a lot of it is software based, and there's almost no marginal cost to setting it up for them. So a lot of the platform that we've set up, we can make available to other people who work on fistula or other topics. So one aspect of it is producing donor reports faster. So that's a big thing that a lot of social organizations will relate to. We spend a lot of time building reports for our different donors. All donors want different kinds of reports. And usually this is a very manual task that people will do in Excel. And now we just have an Alteryx workflow that we run whenever we need that report to be built, and it will produce all the numbers that we need. So in terms of engaging with our donors, it allows us to generally provide better data than we could before, but also do it in a way that doesn't eat up our resources. Sharing insights with the world effectively. Here, I'll take the example of our collaboration with Makeover Monday. So for all of you who don't know, Makeover Monday is a, let's say, community event run by Eva Murray and mainly by Eva Murray. I'm really sorry for the second person who runs it. I forgot your name. But we work with them and provide them with a data set once a month. So once a month, it'll be a data set that we provide. Sometimes it's about fistula, sometimes it'll be about other causes, but our data expertise allows us to build nice data set that the Makeover Monday community can then go and viz about, which generates loads of engagement about loads of different causes. And the final one, so the more interesting one I would say for this presentation is how can we help other fistula organizations with their own work? So here, I'll bring you back here. And I'll tell you that essentially this tech stack and the way that we've organized this is something that internally we called GoFAR. So this integration of ComCare, data pulled out using Alteryx, put into Exasol, and in Tableau dashboards built on top, this little ecosystem is something that we've called GoFAR, and that we actively enable other partners to use. And to give you an idea of how massive this is a sort of a internal report that we use to track the engagement with essentially GoFAR. And so each of the countries on these maps are places where we have partners, whether they be surgeons or other organizations. We work with UNFPA, for example, use our tech. And I've removed the numbers for privacy reasons, but these are hundreds of forms being collected all around the world. This can allow us to fund some surgeons in some places, but it can also just help people use data in their day-to-day work, even though they might not have the expertise to really do it themselves or really the incentive to invest in all the infrastructure internally. We can just provide it to them. We tell them, just install ComCare on your devices, and then we'll handle pretty much all the rest. And we'll build dashboards that are catered to what you want at the end of the day. And this is, to me, one of the coolest parts of really how data can be used for social impact is that the moment one actor develops kind of a tool or a set of tools, it's very easy to share with everyone and to make available to the wider community for them to use in their own day-to-day activities. A final one I'll put on engagement, which is not really fistula related, but goes back to this point I made at the beginning of how is data being used in social impact more generally. I'll show a little project that we worked on a few weeks ago. And so this is something that we built for the Skull World Forum. So Skull World Forum is sort of the Davos, but for NGOs, massive global meeting. And this year, because of the pandemic, people couldn't physically meet. And so they decided to make the entire meeting virtual, but obviously doing things like, networking or fundraising through Zoom is pretty hard. So they told us, can you help us build a tool that would allow people who are meant to attend Skull to find other organizations working the same domain as them or in the same countries as them, and make it possible for them to find individual people. And so you can see, quite happy about the fact that this map was used quite a lot. 22,000 views for Tableau Public is not half bad. And this is a sort of network map where a user can go and click on any of the different elements and filter the list of all the different school attendees at the bottom. And we even made it possible for members of the public who wanted to participate or people who just wanted to learn about Skull, but weren't one of the official attendees, to be added onto this viz to, just make the community be able to benefit from all this. So just another example of how data tools allow at a pretty, cheap cost to achieve things that are, I think, pretty magical. And just the fact that 22,000 people use this Viz, well, probably not all of them use this, maybe some of them just browse, but could use this to find one another, to build synergy. And all of this is, generously hosted by Tableau Public, is pretty amazing. And is another way in which data is really, I think, revolutionizing how the sector works. Okay. Final thoughts. So I think a big thing I hope you've gone through this presentation is that data is nothing but a resource at the end of the day. And it is not fancy dashboards that enable it, but it's process. So we spend a lot of our time going through our data, taking actions based on our data. We integrate things, and I would almost say Slack is our most important data tool. We use data to inform ourselves, but then we make decisions, and we reserve loads of time to actually go through the data, understand it, and do something about it. I will say that the key part of analytics is automating what can be automated to free up time, and also managing points of failure. So in our case, we have so many points of failure. People not having access to internet, people not using Comcare correctly, people not inputting data in the forms correctly. And so the more we can reduce the time we spend doing all the data prep, the more we can actually really do our work and focus on finding more patients and providing them with the best treatment possible. And I guess the summary of all this is that at the end, dashboards don't take actions, it's people that do. It's important to, empower people, train them appropriately, and enable them to take actions. So we are a very transparent company, much like the Information Lab is. We use Slack for everything. Almost everything is posted there, which means that everybody can see what's going on. Everything is made as digestible as possible. All the dashboards I make are demand driven, which is why they're usually quite simple, because they're there to achieve a specific goal. And by doing all of this, putting the data at everybody's fingertips, we are kind of responsibilizing people, making them understand that if they don't do this correctly, we can't treat women as well. But we're also, just empowering them to make decisions in how the organization is run. And that allows us at the end of the day to help as many women as possible. So there we go. Thank you very much for your participation and for having listened to me blabber for quite a while.
Hi everyone, this is Sophie Sparks, the Community Manager here at the Information Lab. I'd like to say thank you so much, Will, for giving us that presentation today and sharing your process at Operation Fistula. I've got a few questions for you that I've thought of as I was listening to your presentation, and also we've had a question that came through on the chat from Hammond. So I'll ask you Hammond's question first. So Hammond wanted to know, and this was sort of very early on in your presentation, just before you got to the efficiency, effectiveness and engagement sort of initial slide, which would half-yearly data for light levels give you any possible insights, especially into the areas you're working with on the ground, sort of looking at some of the mapping?
I'm not 100% certain I know exactly what the question entails, to be honest.
Okay, I think back another slide. It was when you're talking around some of the background around Operation Fistula, and where you may find patients, and some of the difficulty with large geographic areas with not necessarily that much connection. Yes, probably about that great picture there with that Land Rover stuck in a lot of mud.
I mean, is this question about something related to light data, or? Yeah,
as an estimate for where lots of people are, if satellite images using light to show habitation.
Yeah, so I mean, well, I guess that is quite interesting. I would say that there is decent geospatial data for Madagascar in general. And also we have, I think because we have such a strong Madagascar team with loads of professionals that have worked there their whole lives, they actually have an extremely good understanding of how Madagascar works. And I think we know where most of the population is. I think what's really hard is finding the fistula patients within that population. Because as I said, they're quite hidden, and even within the health system, they're not necessarily registered as they would in let's say in a richer country. So I'd say, yeah, our issue is not necessarily knowing where to go. It's more finding the patient themselves, and then just purely logistics of going there and bringing the patients out. So, but definitely an interesting, I'm quite pro using alternative data for, for, let's say, getting insight that it wasn't originally meant for. And I know people in economic analysis have started using satellite data for things like light, volume of light in different areas, or intensity of light to measure like economic growth or yeah. But I think in our specific case, I don't think that's necessarily the issue that we're facing.
Well, thanks for answering that one, Will. So this is a question from me I had while I was watching your presentation. I noticed a lot of the dashboards you showed were mobile formatted, or at least mobile friendly. Sort of quite small ones, not very large dashboards. Is that something you do on purpose, saying that you have lots of people in the field in places like Madagascar who are going to be looking at these? Do you have to consider the types of devices and the connectivity that the end result in the field will be able to use the data on when you design dashboards back here in London and France?
Yeah, I mean, so that's 100%. So I think we have a few. I think we're still working towards getting most of our field staff to use Tableau dashboards directly. I would say it's probably more our senior staff and surgeons who use it today, but we're always working towards trying to enable this, everyone in the organization to have dashboards meant for them. But definitely, I think the simplicity of them, the fact that a lot of them will just be very simple tables with bands. We use standard color gradients like green, red, which I know are not very color friendly. I think, we're trying to make them as simple and as focused as possible to counteract the fact that we're dealing with people who might have a lower level of data literacy, and also working in an environment where computers might not be that good, internet connectivity might be pretty bad. So focusing on getting the key information there and working, rather than trying to focus on really making a very beautiful viz. And I think what's cool is generally, because the data we're being asked for is so demanded, that as long as we provide a dashboard, or at least I build a dashboard that helps answer the question, the users are super happy. Nobody's ever really complained about, oh, it's not pretty enough. I think it's, especially a lot of them who have been working in the field for quite a long time, this is such a massive jump in terms of what data is available to them, that I can focus more on, will this run on their device? Will they be able to load it, and will they be able to understand it, rather than spend a lot of time formatting it so that they're wowed when they look at it, kind of thing. So it's definitely very different considerations than I had when I was a consultant at the Information Lab or BCG before.
Perfect. So I've got two questions that have come through. One which follows on quite nicely from what you're just saying around form over function, and that, well, function over form. Lane has asked, are most of the dashboards you're sharing and that are being used, are they hosted on something like Tableau server, or do you share PDF images of sort of daily results with the guys in Madagascar?
Yeah, so everything is Tableau Online hosted. We try and really focus on that. I think the cool thing is, I don't think there was a step where people were used to just having PDFs instead of having like an automated dashboard. In a way, it's kind of like we've leapfrogged this step. I think the staff in Madagascar is pretty skilled. The office staff, I would say specifically, they've been used to work with Excel for quite a long time, but I feel like they're not as entrenched in their desire to work with that. So using a Tableau Online dashboard doesn't feel specifically weird to them, I would say. So yeah, everything is generally just hosted on Tableau Online. But then once again, and I think that's true for every organization. In some cases, you'd rather, if you're looking for a very specific analysis, people would rather have, just the key figures they want in a little Excel or in a Word doc sent to them. So I'd say it's kind of a mix of both, but we try and focus on making things that are automated. And so kind of a rule of thumb for me is if there's something I get asked to do all the time, then I'll stop that process and I'll tell the person, okay, tell me how I can automate this if you just need it so much, rather than me producing this this little Excel or PDF for you all the time. And then that's the advantage of being a very small organization, is that it's easier for me to be able to stop something that I see as a bit of a bottleneck and to introduce something a bit better, rather than if I was in a huge organization where there's a lot of strict rules. So I think it makes it easy for me to push for automated tools rather than using, just like a PDF or an Excel. Very long-winded answer.
No, that's we've actually had Brian ask around points of automation. So are there any pain points or barriers to automation in your current tech setup? And what are they, and is there anything you would change if possible? So sort of dovetails very nicely onto what you're just saying.
Yeah. So definitely. So I'd say generally my biggest pain points are not really data related. I think we're quite blessed, first of all, to have such amazing tools. So whether it's Alteryx, Exasol, Tableau, Slack, Zapier, Comcare, I feel we're pretty top notch. So in terms of very technical things, generally there's nothing I've been limited by. Most of the barriers to automation are the fact that almost all the data we work with is generated by humans. So there's some of the Comcare data will be metadata, which is, just generated by computer. It's always in the right format. It's always correct. But a lot of the data we get will be just filled in by a person, whether it's a person, field staff, or surgeon, in these Comcare forms. And there's a lot of errors there. There's a lot of duplicate records. Maybe a patient will be registered twice in the process. So that means that the barrier to automation isn't really a technical thing. It's really just dealing with all these human errors. And that's why I think we focus so much on granularity, is that we would rather spend a lot of time checking every record, because for us, each record is a woman. So it's very key to make sure that we're handling it correctly. Like, you can't just ignore it because there's too many nulls. Like, that's a woman. You can't just delete that record. So we focus more on getting that, our sample, or our data very clean by engaging with it very granularly. So then we can build automated tools on top. But that's definitely, I think, an issue that I had never really encountered as much before. It's just that all this data is human entry data. There's so many ways it can go wrong. And that's probably the biggest barrier to automation. And I'm sure all small health organizations struggle with this just as much. But that's why having things, like Airtable or Alteryx or Tableau helps minimize the amount of time we spend doing all that manual cleaning.
Thank you so much for sharing that one, Will. Sorry, I scrolled all the way up to the top instead of all the way down to the bottom, which isn't very helpful. I got a question from George. He's saying, firstly, thank you so much for this, sharing your experience and the process at Operation Fistula. And since Tableau has been used to build dashboards for use in the field, has this made things more efficient? So workers in the field have more time to work in the community as opposed to having to spend a lot of time poring over Excel spreadsheets, for instance. Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, so I feel like there's definitely, I feel like some of the work done by our field staff anyway is not like work that necessarily requires spreadsheets of any kind. The images I showed, I mean, for example, this, the field staff doing this, they're really given a specific place to go. They have their Comcare tablets so they can fill out data, but they don't necessarily need to engage with data that intensely. They do, but even most of them are going to places where there is no internet. So that means that we can't just like use a dashboard to fix a problem. We have to look at other ways of doing it, which might be a lot more manual. We might have our central staff in Madagascar do the analysis and then just call them by phone and be like, hey, we think there's a patient in this place, you need to go there. So I think not every problem we face needs a dashboard, to be honest. But I think that the staff that does need to engage with data, so whether it's even our staff in London, some of the surgeons and really the sort of HQ staff in Madagascar, for them, definitely. I think there's loads of processes. So I've been at Operation Fistula since March, and I think we've done quite a bit of work. So then not just through me, but I think the pandemic helped us slow down and focus a lot on making all of these tools better. But there's loads of things that used to take us so much time, and now just even being able to trust the data in our dashboards, like not just seeing it, and it's something that I think happens everywhere, but seeing a dashboard and be like, this looks funky, just give me the Excel so I can look at myself. Now that we trust the data because we engage with it so granularly, people will just see a number in a dashboard and be like, boom, action, rather than going back and redoing the analysis every time. So I think in the end, there's indirectly, this enables us to do a lot more field work and focus a lot more on finding patients and treating them rather than doing admin tasks or data analysis. So hope that answers the question, George.
Thanks so much, Will. I think it probably does. We're just on time. It's just past 5 o'clock here in London. So give everyone another minute or so to type in any last questions you may have. I know there's always a bit of a lag between Will, you and I talking and it going through digitally onto YouTube Live. So in the last minute or so, if you could maybe quickly let everybody know again where they might be able to find out more information about Operation Fistula. And you did mention that you guys, some of the engagement with Makeover Monday, so other places that people might be able to engage if they are interested in getting to know some of the data and what you guys do more. Just let everyone know there's places and links again. And if there are any more questions that come through while you're doing that, I'll let you know about them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, we have a beautiful website which I think is called fistula.co.uk, but I mean, you'll be able to find all the links in the description anyway. Great place to just learn about obstetric fistula as a whole and see what we do. The VIS5, so Gender Equality Initiative, that is run by one of my colleagues. Amazing way to, I think, actively participate in all this. Every VIS you would make with one of the data sets supports one of the different or helps support one of the different aspects of gender equality. So definitely check out the Makeover Monday website for all of that. And also just, feel free. I'm always happy to share just the knowledge and experience that I've gained since working on Operation Fistula. Always very happy to engage with people, speak with them. So just message me on Twitter, add me on LinkedIn, and I'll be really, really happy to get in touch with all of you and keep trying to make the world a better place.
Perfect. Thanks so much for sharing those. And I just dropped the Operation Fistula, the link to the VIS5 project, which I've just put through from Operation Fistula's blog post about it. And Will's details for LinkedIn and Twitter in the description to this video. And I will now quickly just drop Makeover Monday if people aren't familiar with it. And so that's sort of once a month, you said, or thereabouts. There is
once a month. Yeah, there'll be 12 overall, and there's one. We do essentially once a month. One of the data sets will be about the different aspects of gender equality. We've done things like female genital mutilation or obstetric fistula. So it'll either be a partner NGO giving us some data that we prepare, or it'll just be data that we found online that we think is particularly interesting. And generally, the topic will have to do with some UN event that month. So just to make sure there's as much reach for those very important UN sort of gender equality days. So you on top of learning more about Tableau and getting a chance to get your viz reviewed by Eva and Charlie, you'll also really be directly contributing to advancing the cause of gender equality. So highly recommend participating in that event.
Thanks so much, Will. And I think that's, don't see any more questions. So I think it's a great place to finish this up. So thank you again for giving us your time and explaining what you guys do at Operation Fistula, how you work with your data, but also for spending the time I can't say it. As soon as it's one of those words, as soon as I think about it, I can't say it. Your dashboard, so we can actually see what they look like in real life, because it makes it the message hit home a lot more when you can see the actual product of the data, not just hearing you talk about it. So thank you so much for spending the time to do that. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And for everyone who's tuned in, if you want to rewatch anything that Will's done or catch any of the links, the URL, this will be live on the same URL that you're tuning into it right now. So you can go back and replay the whole presentation. So again, thank you, Will, and thank you everyone for joining us live.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Thank you everybody who tuned in, and hope to catch up with some of you later.